At 3 a.m., a quiet suburban neighborhood in Westfield, Massachusetts, suddenly erupted into chaos as the faint sound of gunshots shattered the calm. Brian Fanion, a respected detective with the local police department, called that his wife, Amy Fanion, was found dead in the dining room with a single gunshot wound to the head. He made the call that would forever change everything. As the dispatcher answers the 911 call, Brian's frantic voice is barely heard over the chaos in the background. His words are erratic, filled with panic. "My wife had shot herself. She's bleeding out. Please help." The chilling urgency in his voice would later haunt investigators as they pieced together the horrifying truth that, in this case, the one who called for help was the very person who had set the tragic chain of events into motion. But no one knew it yet. At this moment, all they knew was that a life had been taken, and the detective's story was just beginning to unravel. Amy Fanion was a devoted wife and mother, known for her kindness and dedication. She was the heart of the family, always making sure her children felt loved and safe. Friends described her as someone who would drop everything to help anyone in need. Amy had grown up in a small, tight-knit community in Massachusetts, where she was loved by all. After meeting Brian in their early 20s, the two married young, building a life together in Westfield. Amy's life was a blend of family and work, but she always found time for her children, her friends, and her passions. She was an avid reader, loved to garden, and enjoyed cooking for her family. As the story begins, Amy had been married to Brian for 33 years. Despite the outward appearance of a perfect life, there were cracks beneath the surface. The couple's relationship was complicated. While they had their good moments, there were hints of tension and underlying struggles, though no one outside of their home could have suspected the truth. The key to Amy's death wasn't just a tragic loss of a wife and mother, it was also the beginning of a web of deception that spanned years. At 1:30 a.m., Brian Fanion returned home after his shift at the police department. Amy was still awake, sitting on the couch. By 2 a.m., an argument began. Brian later claimed it was about money and their strained relationship, but no one could confirm his side of the story. The day of Amy's death wasn't as straightforward as Brian's story suggested. Investigators began piecing together a different narrative from the couple's communications leading up to the incident. At 2:30 a.m., Brian was seen pacing in the backyard by a neighbor, shouting into his phone. At 3 a.m., the 911 call came in. By then, Amy was already dead. The authorities began questioning the details of Brian's statement. The inconsistencies in his timeline, such as the lack of visible signs of forced entry and the presence of a weapon that wasn't initially mentioned, raised doubts. Still, there was no immediate suspicion. Yet, the first clue that something wasn't right emerged as investigators realized that Brian's story was filled with contradictions. It seemed impossible that someone with his background, a detective with years of experience in law enforcement, could make such errors. The more they dug, the more unusual his behavior seemed. The police initially believed that Amy's death was a tragic, random act, possibly a botched robbery. But the crime scene didn't add up. Despite the initial assumptions, authorities soon began to realize that something about the scene didn't fit. No signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Nothing had been stolen, and the weapon used was registered to Brian himself. Brian's Fanion was shaky. The time of his arrival home didn't match with the 911 call. As the investigation continued, frustrations grew. Amy's death was ruled a homicide, but with so many loose ends, investigators found themselves chasing down dead-end theories. The robbery theory was quickly dismissed. They couldn't ignore the possibility that the shooter knew Amy. And yet, for a while, all leads seemed to circle back to Brian, who remained eerily calm and cooperative, too cooperative. One of the most damning pieces of evidence that emerged was a series of texts Brian had sent to his mistress in the days leading up to the murder. The nature of their conversations hinted at a life he was hiding. His extramarital affair was about to play a major role in the case. This was the first direct indication that the murder had been a deliberate act. But the shocking twist came when detectives uncovered Brian's hidden internet search history. Just days before the murder, Brian had searched for information about poisons, firearm ownership, and the best way to cover up a shooting. This discovery turned the case upside down. The man who had sworn to protect and serve had been planning his wife's death for weeks. As more evidence emerged, it became clear that Brian had used his knowledge of criminal procedures to cover his tracks, even down to the details of the crime scene. But what investigators didn't expect was the final piece of the puzzle: the affair. Brian's relationship with his mistress had become so serious that he was planning to leave Amy for her. But something went wrong. Amy had found out, and in a moment of confrontation, Brian made a fateful decision. The final bombshell came into the courtroom when Assistant District Attorney Mary Sandstrom stated in court, there was only one way to enjoy his retirement and his new love affair, and that was to murder his wife. The courtroom was stunned as the defense unraveled the truth piece by piece. Brian had lured Amy into a sense of false security, then executed his plan under the guise of a tragic incident. He had murdered his wife not for revenge, but to start a new life with someone else. The emotional impact on Amy's family and friends was palpable. Their grief was compounded by the realization that the man they had trusted, the man who was supposed to protect the community, was the one responsible for their loss. In the wake of the conviction, the community was shaken. Amy's family, especially her children, struggled with the betrayal. For them, it wasn't just the loss of a mother, it was the realization that their father had betrayed them in the worst way imaginable. Despite the conviction, questions still lingered. Was this the whole truth? Had Brian acted alone? Was there someone else behind the scenes, someone who had helped orchestrate this dark plot? If you thought this case was chilling, you'll want to see the next. Leave your theories in the comments below. Did Brian act alone? What do you think was the true motive? Let us know your thoughts.